welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Today, Tim and I are talking about a term that many of you have maybe heard before. I think it's not well understood. And so we're going to get into it. And it's called trauma bonding. And we're talking a little bit about trauma dumping too. So these are kind of popular terms today. And I don't even think I knew what they were. I mean, we weren't talking about these terms 10, 15 years ago. Not so much when I was working in psych and eating disorders. Although trauma bonding was going on, I don't think we used that term, at least not the way we do today. So I wanted to do a deep dive on it because it's something that I've been talking about with clients and something that, if I do mention it to like friends or if I'd say it to you, I don't know if you would know what it is. I don't like people are like, what's a trauma bond?
I heard of this before about 3 minutes ago, so there's that.
Okay. I just told you 3 minutes ago. Yeah, because I told you 3 minutes ago what we're talking about today.
"Hey, have you ever heard of this trauma bombing?" I'm like, "What?"
Bond,
I
bond,
know, I'm
not
joking.
trauma bombing.
I'm
Come on.
joking. I'm joking. I'm with you.
But it's interesting because as soon as I told you the definition of it, you're like, "Oh, that's so
Yeah.
and so and
Well, I
so.
gave you a good
They
example.
have a trauma
Like,
bond." I'm like,
yeah.
"Okay, so there you go."
We'll see. We'll see if
So,
it
okay.
falls out
Yeah,
that
yeah.
way,
All right. Well,
so
I had to go back. So, just for the listener and if you're viewing this on YouTube, this is I know a lot of information from almost 30 years of being in psychology and practicing psychotherapy and coaching, but I don't know it all, and with much humility and with, hands raised going, I don't know it all. I have to go and research some of these topics just to make sure that I'm, up on the latest because that's very important to me, right? To be up on the latest and to understand neuroscience. It's so great what's happening in the world of neuroscience and what we understand that we didn't understand even 5 years ago. So, I take notes, and you'll often see me if you're watching this, you're gonna see me with my notes here because I have to write these things down and do my research so that I make sure that I'm doing my due diligence and coming to the listener, and the viewer, with, the proper information, with the knowledge that they need. So
well,
that's
it's
really that
important. I
yeah,
mean,
it's important. It's
science
important.
changes,
Totally. Yeah.
research changes. You have to be on top of it or else you're giving out dated
Yeah.
info, so it's good.
So, and I think that there's a lot of people in the social media space who are talking about these types of topics as well. And sometimes they don't have it right. They don't get it right, or they speak in a way that's very binary. It's either this or this. And even sometimes I'm like, I don't know if that's true. And so I think you really have to vet the people you choose to follow. I think you have to vet, uh, you know, who you listen to on Instagram and TikTok, that's the 2 main ones, or maybe Facebook, people you may follow on there. I just think you have to really vet them, okay? And they have to be credible. You have to know, like, and trust them. You gotta trust them, and they've gotta be credible. So, um, that's just my bet. I always want to and I wanna learn from the people who I like academia. I come from there, so, I like academia. I like research, the right research, because you can find any study that can prove whatever it is you think. So I think that you got it.
That's the truth.
It's true, right?
That's so
Yeah, so I
true.
think it's important to really decipher who you're going to listen to. So that's important to me. So it's important to me as a listener, viewer myself, and it's important for me that you all have the right information. So let's get into it.
Let's go.
So, what exactly is a trauma bond? When you know I use that term, I think of people who are close together, emotionally attached to one another, and it comes about from a traumatic experience that two people have gone through in their lives, and they've talked to each other about it. So here's the definition. A trauma bond refers to the strong emotional attachment that develops between a person and their abuser, particularly in a relationship characterized by an ongoing cycle of abuse, intermittent reinforcement, manipulation, and power imbalances. So this goes back to the world of domestic violence,
Mhm.
power imbalances. That's really what I think of when I read that definition. That's not how trauma bonding in the lay world is being used today. Trauma bonding is being used very loosely. So this is when I learned about when I was educated back when I worked in the hospital and I worked in the ER, you had to know all of this because we had domestic violence patients in the emergency room and you needed to know how to counsel them, crisis intervention very quickly. And you needed to know, how to so-called treat as social workers and psychologists, therapists. So, you know, so this definition I think of is it's a bond between a person and their abuser, particularly in a relationship characterized by an ongoing cycle of abuse. Uh, you do see that. That's more common than I think we realize, or maybe we want to know. We do see it, but it's not something that you will see out just in society, in the world, talking with your friends. You're not going to hear so much about that. Does that make sense? You hear more about trauma bonds. And as a listener, you get a weird feeling. And I think of it more like with girlfriends who are very close, um, who are like, you think, that's a little, they're like in mesh. Like they almost seem like they're kind of weirdly close with each other. You could see this all the way back to like middle school and high school years. Two girls who are like each other's ride or dies, but it's like they seem to lack boundaries with each other. Many times they've gotten close because they've told each other their deep, dark stories. Maybe they come from abusive families. Maybe somebody went through something that was very difficult, and the friend or the newer friend says, "This is what I went through. I went through something like that too." And then you bond because you feel seen and heard and validated, but that can go awry over time. What once starts out as something that it's wonderful to feel validated can go the pendulum can swing way too far in the other direction where you get really enmeshed and you can get unhealthy with the other person.
Hmm.
So that's really what I'm talking about more today.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting. So, trauma bond. So, is it safe to say that most instances, the two people knew each other prior to, or did they independently have something that there was a moment of trauma, two different things?
it
And
can be both.
what's
Yeah.
is there one that's more prevalent, or is it like, is it a
I
wash?
don't know the statistics on that. I don't
Yeah.
know what's more prevalent, but you do see it sometimes with siblings who grew up in a
Mm,
domestic violence home with maybe a mom and a dad or their parental figures. Maybe they saw um, uh, addiction. Maybe they saw, as kids, maybe they both experienced inebriation, somebody who had a problem with drinking alcohol or drugs. Uh, siblings can bond together because they're trying to survive in this home and they bond that then they can trauma bond over their experiences. You see this a lot with a parent who's narcissistic, what we call narcissistic abuse, and the kids can bond together. That's a trauma bond because they had a narcissistic parent who, and that's a conversation. That's a whole other episode about narcissistic abuse. But yeah, so they can bond over that. Where I saw it, uh, and I was always concerned about it. And I remember talking with my colleagues, we were concerned about so when I worked in eating disorders and when I worked in adolescent and adult psych, we ran groups and, the patients would eat together and they'd have breakfast and they ran through other groups together other than when they had their individual therapy session or maybe they had a family therapy session, but they went through the day together and they had downtime. And whether it be in a group and you try to protect for this in the group setting as the therapist, you couldn't always prevent it. But what you couldn't prevent and you couldn't foresee is maybe you saw two people who were, becoming friends, getting to know each other. We even used to say back then, we really don't want you socializing outside of here. We want you to just maintain your relationship here in the program and don't befriend each other outside and don't make plans with each other. And that never worked. And I really mean the word never because it just never worked because if people made friendships and connections and they sometimes trauma bonded, they wanted to see each other outside of group or outside of program, and they would.
yeah.
Um, what what concerned me was if there was an experience that somebody had around a childhood trauma, and then somebody else had something similar, and then they would connect either in group or they would like at lunch, they would just be together, talk together. I went through that too, and this is my and then they were trauma bonded. And what happens, like I said, is over time, it can get really unhealthy. So, one person kinda so, okay. So, I'm gonna stick with that, I won't go any further with that. So, um, going back to the world of domestic violence and narcissistic abuse, the bond forms. Now, this is if you're the victim of domestic violence. So let's say I am the victim, and I'm not going to say you because this is completely not your personality, but let's say I'm in a relationship with a man who is an abuser. The bond forms because I become emotionally dependent. I'm the victim. Let's say I'm getting hit or I'm getting thrown around or I'm getting also verbally and emotionally abused. The bond forms because me, the victim, I become emotionally dependent on my abuser. And due to this cycle of abuse that we talk about, cycle of abuse is there's periods of love, attention, affection, and that's followed by abuse, whether it be physical abuse, verbal, emotional, and it can, the way where I saw it was somebody would end up in the emergency room because they got hit. And then what happens is it would just drive us crazy. They'd go back to that person. Usually the person came to the emergency room. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know what happened. They make up. The victim forgives them. And now they're in this honeymoon period. So this is a cycle of abuse. They're
Mm,
in this honeymoon period. There's some quiet. There's some good times that are happening. There's not a lot of drama until the next time. So let's say this is me. I am trauma bonded to this person because I've forgiven him. He said he was sorry. He didn't mean to do it. He's had a lot of stress. There's a lot going on in his life, and I don't like that he did it, and he did it, and I'm going to forgive him.
yeah.
So that's kind of a more traditional trauma bond.
That's, like, opposite of what it sounds like this should be, right? Like, the bond, it's not a good thing.
No, it's not. They're not
Yeah.
good
Yeah, yeah,
bonds.
yeah. This example is
This
terrible
example.
bond.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
And
That's interesting.
it makes it really hard for the victim to leave
Yeah.
that ab and even if they know they're in an abusive situation, makes it hard for them to leave because you're always holding on to the hope for them to change. You're holding on to the hope that they're going to or return to the person that they used to be when we first got together.
Right. Like, at one point, it probably was a good place, right? Like, everything was fine for them
In the beginning,
at the beginning.
you're infatuated with one another. The
Yeah.
very beginning is we're in love and, it's all great, and it's that honeymoon period in the very beginning, and then they turn, and you have this hope that they will go back to being the person that they were, or I think sometimes even worse is, like, if this was me, I may blame myself for why he got so upset. Well, I shouldn't have talked back to him. I should have gotten in his face because I was in that fight too. I shouldn't have done shoulda, coulda, woulda. Shouldn't have done this, shouldn't have done that. So I will take part of the blame for it. So that's a more kinda air quote traditional trauma bond. Um,
That's interesting.
yeah, yeah. So what are okay, and then let's talk a little bit about the example that you said before we started recording of people we know who are trauma bonded, and that's so they don't listen to the podcast, but, you all would never know who they are. There's never any identifying information. They are people who got together many decades ago because they both were in crisis over the loss of a loved one.
Right.
So they lost their
Right.
their spouse.
Yeah. Which was for so 2 separate instances, both traumatic.
One was in a marriage, one was in one marriage, the other was in their marriage.
Yeah.
Spouses died,
Yeah.
and they came together in their grief, in their loneliness, and they stayed together. And you and I have known them for a long time and thought, we don't know that they ought to be together. It's probably not the best thing for them. But you said earlier, I never thought of it like that. You said, I think they were trauma bonded now that you described the definition before we started recording. And I thought, I never thought about that either. I mean, maybe I don't know because I don't know them in that way, but they very well could have been trauma bonded. So it's when we knew them, it wasn't good. And we would often wonder, why don't you leave? Why don't you both leave the situation? So not good because you both complain about each other incessantly, but maybe they were trauma bonded and didn't know how to leave one
I
another.
think that was probably it. I think it was that and just time.
What brought them together in their grief,
Yeah.
they moved out of their grief, but they were bonded because of shared experiences.
Right.
Yeah.
right? And decades of shared experiences. I mean,
Right.
at that point, it was just that was the new,
Right.
you know?
So, and for today's episode, I want to talk specifically more about trauma bonds between friends. So I was using the example earlier. That's more the classic example of a trauma bond between a domestic violence case or someone who's in a narcissistically abused relationship, whether you be the partner in it or you be maybe a child in a home where you had a parent who is a narcissistic abuser. And now I want to move into you have a friend that you are trauma bonded with, like we just gave the example of it could be like siblings, or it could be two people who met in a program and they shared a terrible traumatic experience of what they went through when they were younger, or it could be something maybe people are trauma bonded because they're at work and they have a horrific boss and they both were abused, like mentally abused by their boss. And these two employees get together because they're trauma bonded over it. You know, okay, so once again, remember what starts out as something that is a validation and a support can go awry. Okay, so trauma bonds between friends occur, this is the definition, in friendships where the connection is maintained through shared experiences of trauma or through dynamics that mirror those of abusive relationships. So these bonds are characterized by an imbalance of power, emotional manipulation, or the cyclic nature of support and harm. So maybe you wouldn't see it as much in the workplace, although you can, because an individual can turn out to be a different person once you get to know them personally than how you know them as a colleague at the workplace. Because now you're really good friends, and these are people who maybe now they're taking their friendship outside of work. They're hanging out with each other on the weekends. They're going to dinners. They're friends outside of work, and there can be an imbalance of power of one manipulating the other, um, um, because they want to gain something, they want to get something from the other person. You see this a lot in, and I know I've seen it as a female growing up. I've seen people in friendship trauma bonds, and because I know, like maybe I'm in a part of a larger friend group, and I have seen, or several of us have seen, why those two are acting weird. Like they do like different things on their own together outside of the group, and that's fine, but they're acting weird. And she's totally different than how she used to be, and she's different with her. And it can be a trauma bond where you see your one friend is changing and is different. And I've even had an experience where I've talked to this person. This is decades ago. I've talked to this person, and they're like, "Well, no, I can't leave. I can't leave her. I can't step away. I can't leave the relationship and I can't step away because she needs me. She's not going to be the same. We have a special bond with each other. Um, what? Yeah, but I see her. She's totally rude to you when we're all together, and he or she puts you down. Like, why are you tolerating that? And it feels like it's getting toxic and abusive, and they back up why they have to stay in the relationship, the strong friendship with that person. That's a trauma bond.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen this several
I
times throughout my
I
life.
think I think I've seen it from a distance. So
Yeah,
somewhere this is probably decades ago also, but, I worked someplace part-time, and I was aware of the full-timers, and there were just too many spiderweb situations
yeah.
going on and just relationships that were just off, and it was all just like, "What?" Like, you'd take pause and be like, "What's going on?" Well, later we did find out. There was all kinds of stuff going on, but people were just acting weird and
Yeah.
gravitating towards each other and trying to justify this or that, and it was just like in real time, it was, like, confusing, but, like, when we found out what was going on later, then it was like, "Oh, now it all makes total sense."
I mean, you might know it as a listener or someone who's watching this. So what I want you to think about is there are times when you might say to yourself, their relationship is toxic. Like it is toxic. And you get an icky feeling being around it or observing the way they are with one another, and they've changed, or one person that you thought you knew has really changed. You're like, what is going on with the two of them? That could be an example of a trauma bond. You might be seeing two people who are bonded through their trauma. You might see people, something is off because you see the manipulation, but they don't see it, and even when you talk to them about, "Don't you see? Don't you see how they're treating you? Like, don't you see the manipulation?" I mean, I see it.
Yeah.
We all see it, and they are quick to defend them. "No, no, no, but they need me. I can't get out of this relationship. I can't pull away. I can't have put boundaries up because they need me." And the other person may be kinda guilting them, um, putting fear into them that you need me, like creating this dependency, this or codependency, like we talked about in previous episode.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard to watch. It's hard to watch Friends. So you haven't seen it. I've seen this several times throughout, like I just said, and with my some female friends from geez, from high school on. I've seen this few times in my life. You know, I think that I trauma bonded with a friend when I was going through my divorce because I was so traumatized by what happened with uh, my family and how everybody just kind of turned their back on me. And I was so alone. I was so alone through that whole experience with three little kids. And I had a new friend that was divorced. Her kids were much older than mine. And she shared with me what she went through, and I had nobody. And looking back, and I haven't thought about this in a long time, I did trauma bond with her. And so I was this person because I had a friend I'm still very good friends with today who she was so this person I trauma bonded with was new in the neighborhood. She was a new person that moved in. And so my friends who had already been in the neighborhood that I was very close with, this is one friend who didn't turn her back on me when I was going through my divorce and she knew my ex-husband, but she just really stayed she was upset about the divorce, but she stayed supportive of me and she's still today just a wonderful friend. She was like, "What is going on with you? Every time we're together, you act weird. You guys are talking. You're over talking with each other." And we looked and we were very enmeshed because she's the only one I felt could understand what I was going through. But it did get weird.
Hmm.
It did get weird. And I know you know who I'm talking about because you came into the picture later. And the person then it got really out of balance because that person then was talking to me, would monopolize conversation. We were all together, like groups of people, like 5, 6, 7, 8 people, maybe like a barbecue in the backyard or, hang I don't know, like girls' night out with the neighborhood because we had a girls' night out group. And she my friend, who's still my very good friend today, it's the one of 2 times in the 23 years I've known her that she got angry with me, and it was about this. And she said twice, she said something to me once, and I completely ignored her and blew her off because there was the gain for me that we call a primary gain for me was I was getting validated and I was getting someone who's nodding going, I understand what you're going through. I understand because I went through it too.
Hmm.
And then the second time, many months later, we were at, I think, someone's backyard, having, a neighborhood barbecue. And I didn't see what I was doing. I would go and I would talk to her. We'd all be hanging out, but before you knew it, I was sitting in the chair next to her, and she and I were having our own conversation with each other. And what ended up happening was that she would kinda verbal vomit on me about all the problems in her life. And I naturally would just listen to it because it's just my nature as a therapist and a listener. Um, but also we had this bond. And I think she felt like only Anna will understand, and I probably felt like only I can really understand this. And it made my other friend so mad. She's like, "Don't you see what she's doing?" You remember this.
Yeah, totally.
You remember this? And
Yeah.
she's the only time she raised her voice to me, what she said, she goes, "She just rose up all over you."
Right.
And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And it was like the light bulb went off because she is such a chill, mellow friend. And to see her get upset twice in like a 6-month period of time over the same situation, I woke up and I realized what I was doing. And I realized, and here I am in my own practice, and I didn't even see what was right in front of me.
Yeah.
And I went and was with my own therapist and talked to my therapist about it. And it was like I had this revelation, like, oh my gosh, I'm trauma bonded with her and I need to get my boundaries up. And that's what I did. And so what I did was I stepped away. I didn't provide that listening ear that I did for many, 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 many months, probably at least a year before that. I stopped doing that and I would listen a little bit, 'cause I didn't wanna be I didn't wanna I just couldn't be cold turkey with her because I felt that that wasn't fair, that's kinda mean. But what I did was I slowly backed away. I would listen and I kept saying, "You need to see a therapist. You need to see a therapist." And I gave her the name of my therapist, I think. I think I gave her the name of my therapist. And I think she went because she went to therapy. And it was amazing how it dramatically changed. The relationship dramatically changed because she finally got what she needed and it broke the trauma bond.
Interesting.
You don't, do you not know this? I don't know if I ever told you that part.
I don't know, I didn't know the end of it, no, but
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
no,
what broke
I
it.
do remember this situation
Because you were,
100%.
I remember you came along and you were annoyed too.
Yeah,
You were annoyed by it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was like, I was one of those things where it was so obvious,
Not to me,
but
though.
yet you didn't either choose to see it or didn't see it, right? Like, it was because it was there, and it was like, you I think, or maybe you just didn't wanna see it. Maybe that was what it was. I don't know.
I don't know. I think I didn't choose to see it. I didn't want to see it. I was obviously getting something out of it because, well, I was. I was getting a listening ear and I was getting empathy when I didn't have very much of that in my life. And
Yeah, I mean, there were wins for you with this.
and she was somebody who would do the deep dive with me.
Yeah,
I have a lot of friends. You have certain levels of friendship. She was the friend that we could really spend hours deep diving on life. Like, there were no shallow conversations with her, but it went too far. It went too far,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't so that's what happened. I think she went to my therapist. But it was amazing because and then our relationship just got healthy again. And all that time, what she needed was she needed to see a therapist, and I needed to move out of stop trying to be I don't think I was trying to rescue her, but I think I was so grateful for her listening to me that I listened to her.
Yeah.
But we were bonded.
I mean,
We were
it
bonded.
was good for both of you in the moment, right? And then until it wasn't.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna go on a little bit about, some of the key characteristics of trauma bonds in friendships. This is something for you to look out for, and for those of you who are listening or watching, think of these friendships in your life, past or present, and this will help you understand if you're in a trauma bonding relationship. You have intense emotional experiences, number 1, and that's what I just was talking about. Intense emotional experiences. The
Yeah.
friendship may have formed or deepened through shared experiences of trauma or intense emotional situations. In this case, both of our divorces, leading to a bond that feels uniquely profound and difficult to break, even when the friendship becomes harmful. There you go. You all saw something, you're like, you got to break away from that. It's annoying watching how the two of you are together, you're going off in your little chairs and talking and whatever. Like, we're all here together. It got weird, but probably I felt that it was uniquely profound and it was what I needed in my life because I was in such a bad way in the beginning during my separation, divorce. Number 2, there's cyclic harm and support. So similar to trauma bonds in romantic relationships, which I just talked about with domestic violence situations, or familial relationships, these friendships can involve cycles where periods of emotional support are followed by phases of harm, such as betrayal, emotional abuse, or manipulation. So this cycle creates confusion and fosters a dependency on the friendship for emotional support, despite the harm it also causes. Now, I didn't have that. I didn't have that in this relationship, but trauma bonds, there can be one can be one can be abusive to the other emotionally, but both people can be emotionally abusive to the other. And it forms this really weird dysfunctional bond, but it also feels good to be connected to the person. So even though in your head you know it's not right and you know you're being manipulated, you know there might be a power imbalance, in your heart it feels really good to be bonded with someone because you have such a deep need for connection and understanding from someone. So you will take the emotional manipulation, the obnoxious comments, the rude comments. You'll take you don't need, why do you need to go to your parents on Sunday night? Why do you need to go over there for family dinner? Stay with me. No, you could just, let's us be together. Come on. I haven't
Hmm.
seen you all week. Just
Yeah.
stay with me. But that becomes a pattern, and it for you, the receiver of it, it can feel really good. It's very soothing. And that can get addictive. It can be hard to pull yourself out of that.
I mean, this is like a classic, like, push pull thing.
Yeah.
right? Where you've got opposing forces going to at it and at the same time, different directions.
Yeah.
And it's like, which is stronger,
Right.
right? Which one's gonna outdo the other?
So think for yourself, okay?
Hmm.
So, when you think about trauma bonds and friendships, number one is that you have an intense emotional experience together. There can be cyclic harm and then support. Number three, we're sliding right into it, fear of abandonment. One or both of the individuals in this friendship trauma bond may fear being alone or not having support from anybody else in their life, which keeps them tied to the friendships, even when they recognize its toxicity. That was me a little bit. I didn't recognize its toxicity until I did, and then I pulled back. But many times people, they know it can be toxic, but it doesn't matter. That fear of abandonment far outweighs the toxicity of the relationship. They'll take that it's dysfunctional. They'll take that there can be emotional manipulation, really mean, cutting words said because they don't want to be abandoned and they love the good stuff when it's there.
That's another tough spot, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
No, see?
yikes.
Now you see. You
Yeah.
see how hard it can be. You get into this, it can be hard to get out.
Yeah.
Number the next one, number 4 is isolation. So a friend involved in a trauma bond may isolate themselves from other relationships, either because a toxic friend monopolizes their time and energy, or because they are subtly encouraged to distance themselves from others who might offer a healthier perspective. Like I said, come on, you don't need to go to your. Come, why do you have to do family dinner? Like, well, we can both go. No, no, no. Let's just stay home. Come on, let's just be together tonight. Let's just like lie on the couch on our blankets and let's just stay with each other. Netflix and chill. Open a bottle of wine here. You don't have to be around them because the person may feel threatened by the family members or other friends. So you may find that, you know, the person you're in the relationship with, the friend may now kind of want you to flake on plans that you used to always make with your other girlfriends or boyfriends, or your group of friends, the they thems. Like, I don't want to, let's not do that. Come on. It's,
Hmm.
it's better. Let's just go to dinner, just the two of us.
Yeah.
It's wanting it feels complimenting too, because they want all your time and attention. It feels like you're being love bombed. It feels really good. But notice over time, you're isolating from others. You're not seeing your family. You're not seeing your sister, your brother, who you normally are really close to. You're not seeing your other friends,
Yeah.
you know?
Hmm.
You're not going out to happy hour with or wherever it is. You're not going for a run with everybody after work like you used to, because you gotta get home to the other person.
And then does that person then start to recognize that? Will they
Well, we'll
oh,
get to it.
we're getting there? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Alright.
And the next one is empathy and justification. The person finds that they find themselves continually justifying their friend's harmful behavior. Like I just said, due to understanding their background, their challenges, you know, it further deepens the bond through empathy for the friend's circumstances. Like, no, 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 but you don't know what they've been through. Let's say, like, my friend, my good friend I'm still friends with today says she did. She said to me, "Why, you're weird with her. You act weird and you're like all over, like all you do is talk to her and we all get together." I'm like, "No, no, no, but you don't understand. We have this she's really been through something and you don't understand because you're not that kind of like you don't want to have you don't and she doesn't like to have these really deep conversations. She's like, "I have no time for that." But you don't understand because she's really been through something, and I have empathy, and, she needs that. So, I'm justifying because of my empathy for her and her understanding of me, why I'm so close to just her. Does that make
And you
sense?
and you're justifying for both of you.
For both of us, of course. I
Yeah.
have to justify for myself, and I have to justify for her.
Right.
Why are we are in this trauma bond?
Right.
So that leads me into and this is okay, so that's the trauma side, that's the therapy side of things. So I work with clients in my therapy practice around trauma bonds all the time. Um, trauma dumping is when someone dumps all their trauma on you and you didn't see it coming. So these are common terms: trauma dumping, trauma bonding. That's psychotherapy. You really need to see trauma expert, I would say, and I think it's a licensed mental health therapist. I'm always going to say that. I'm always going to say that because I know that there are people out there in the coaching world who are doing trauma personally and professionally. So it's personally, I think that they need to really have some intense training in trauma in order to be able to treat that. So if you this is something that resonates for any of you who are listening, I would recommend you find a licensed mental health therapist in your state to work with you. I'm only licensed in the state of Illinois, so I can see people in Illinois only. Now, this next phase we're going into is the coaching side of things. Okay. So this is, let's say you realize you're in a trauma bond, you want to get out of it, and you've, y- you're moving out of it. Actually, you're moving out of it. You've stepped away from that person and you need help moving forward in your life. You can do this with a coach. You don't have to see a therapist who specializes in trauma in order to do this work. So, this is more now moving into the personal development space, the life coaching space. Okay. So, you know, my next thought was, all right, what do we do? How do I work to help people move out of like historical friendship or relationship bonds that they are in due to their traumas. So, and this can be, I see this a lot with family members. So, like I said at the beginning of this episode, you've got maybe you got two sisters who grew up in a with a narcissistic mother, and there was all this narcissistic abuse. And I have a client. She comes to me, and she's done a lot of work in therapy around that narcissistic mother, and she's in a much better place. She's worked in her trauma, and she's good. Like she's really, really good, but she finds that she has these historical trauma bonds, let's say with a sister, with a brother, and, for the most part, they live in different states or they live in the same town, but they don't see each other all the time. They don't talk about it that much anymore. And then they go through periods where they do. Maybe it's at the holidays, at Thanksgiving, they go back. Or maybe it's, I don't know, on a road trip, they go back. Um, it's important to for people in the that are interested in being coached who want to move out of it. I'm going to go into how you start to do it. Okay, number 1, and I think I've already said it, acknowledge the trauma bond. Acknowledge it. Acknowledge that you have this bond of trauma with someone. That yeah, I mean, we needed each other for all kinds of reasons when we were 10 years old, and thank God we had each other. But I can't keep talking about this. I can't keep reliving this. I have done this work in my and with my therapist. I've gone to trauma support groups. I've done this work, but every time I get together with him or her, every time, um, I see that friend, we go back to these conversations. I don't want to do this anymore. So those are more the historical trauma bonds. You got to acknowledge it. Okay, that's step number 1. Step number 2 is I do think that you need to get coaching around this. You can get coaching around, okay, there was a trauma, I worked through it. Now let's start to move beyond how we can get you out of we're gonna talk a little bit in coaching, at least I'm gonna talk a little bit in coaching about the roots. So I am gonna go back because I you have to go back because I need to understand where you're coming from. So we're gonna go back and look in the rearview mirror. We're gonna look back there for a little bit, but then we're gonna stop looking in the rearview mirror and we're gonna stay in the present. We're moving towards the future. But I think you do need, you know, and what sometimes happens is I've had people who have trauma and they come to me for coaching because they want to move out of these historical relationships, and then I realize, oh, they're not there yet because I might see affect of like deep sadness or depression coming on, lots of grief coming up. They're getting triggered, and then I realized this happened to me, this happened last year. The client realized, "Oh, I'm not ready for coaching. I thought I had worked on this and I got more work to do." So
Hmm.
I mentioned it here on the podcast before. It was a great example. She went back to therapy and then we stopped the coaching. She went back to therapy, did some real good trauma work around this relationship with a family member of hers, came back to me and came back for coaching. We talked about the trauma a little bit. Of course, it
Yeah.
would come up in conversation, but it wasn't the focus. She could not focus on being coached because she was so wow, it was like all this stuff that she thought she had worked on percolated to service to the surface, excuse me, percolated to the surface.
Yeah.
And then she came back after doing that work. So there you go. So sometimes you need to kind of do a go round. You need to go around it once, you go around it twice, you go around it 3 times. And for everybody, when do you get resolve? There's no easy answer for that. For everyone's different. Some people can do the trauma work once. Many people have to spend years in therapy, but not everybody does. This is a good case of a woman who had been in therapy when she was in her 20s and 30s. She came to me now, she's in her late 50s, and she had like, I did that work 20 years ago, and here she is, and our work together brought it up, and she just and it was really coaching about the future. It was interesting, and it just something innocuous was mentioned about a family member, and I said, "Read this book," and that book, and I've had other people read that book, it just was a it was a good book to read for, more surface level help with, getting you thinking about I shouldn't say surface level, but getting you thinking about, not doing a deep dive, but getting you think about relationships in your life and how you want them to be, how they are today and how you want them to be moving into the future, and that book just really brought all this up,
Got her going.
which surprised both of us,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hold on a second. So you said something about
I know I just said a mouthful.
no, 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 it's fine. But so the comment about the rear view mirror, isn't that like the difference really between therapy and coaching?
Yeah, it
That's
can be,
like
yeah.
it. Like in
Yeah.
therapy, you're spending a lot of time looking in the rear view mirror, correct?
I use that term a lot. That's from AA, 12 step. You look
Yeah.
back, but don't stare. That's really about moving past your shame and your guilt. Okay, look back. You did these things, but don't stare in that rearview mirror.
Like
Yeah.
coaching, I feel like
Yeah.
you take a glance, but it's really what you're trying to you got this eye on the prize out there in
Yeah. And
front
I
of you.
think that you have to do that looking back work in order to move into the present day work. I mean, and if you don't, it's going to come up in coaching. If you don't, I'm going to know it because it's going to come up because I see
Yeah.
it. I mean, I have like, I've like, I can viscerally, I've been doing this for so long, I can smell blood. I see it immediately. Okay, there's more work that needs to be done here that's beyond coaching. It's deeper than coaching. So you need psychotherapy for that. That's not coaching.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the client is staring in the rearview mirror and they gotta stare in the rearview mirror. They gotta look back. So I'm like, all right, stop the car, put your foot on the brake, stop the car, get out.
And
Don't
look
keep
backwards.
don't keep staring in the rearview mirror while you're driving.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I use this metaphor a lot because we say look back but don't stare. You look back at the rearview mirror in the coaching world. Yes, we do look back, but you got to look forward because if you don't look forward, you're gonna get into a car accident. So you look forward in your life to where you want to be. What are your goals? What are your aspirations? What do you want your life to look like? You are fantastic. You are amazing. I'm going to help you get to where you want to be based on what you come up with, what your goals are.
Yeah.
Yes, and there are times when I'm like, "All right, put the foot on the brake. Let's get out. You got to look back there. You do need to work on that."
Yeah, because a therapy client is most likely trying to work on something that happened to them earlier in life, whether it was a week ago or 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And that's what their focus is on versus a coaching client is like they've got a goal but they're not sure of the path to get there. And they might need to take a quick peek behind them to make sure that they understand where they're coming from or through, right? In
Yeah.
order to get that way.
Okay. I
And
have
I'm
to
only
say,
asking this because, like, you
yeah.
said that, and I was confused. I'm like, "Well, if I'm confused and someone is listening, this is like, what? What was that? That
Yeah. Yeah.
rear
No,
view
it's a really
mirror?"
good
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
I love that. I use it all the time. I think that I am being simplistic in a way because I do know therapists who are positive psychology therapists who also think the way I do. And they're not coaches, they're therapists. But for the most part, our brief solution focused therapy is a form of therapy that therapists also do. I do it. Um, we come from a positive psychology background. So, yes, the differences are as a therapist versus a coach. As a coach, there's a lot of accountability. My coaching clients come to me for accountability. My therapy clients do not come to me so much for accountability. I do it a little bit because it's just my wiring. and I will hold people accountable, but I don't have a Google Doc that I share with them. I don't text my therapy clients throughout the week. I do with my coaching clients. That's a part of what they pay for. There's a lot of high touch points with my coaching clients. So the way I work as a therapist versus a coach is very different.
Right.
So if that makes sense. So there is some, those concentric circles. There's the area where coaching and therapy, I think, do realistically and honestly speaking, they do overlap. But for the most part, the way I work with a client in therapy is you have your session. I'm a conversational therapist. So I'm not going to sit there and just not say anything to you. Just the whole time. That's not how I work. So I'm a conversational therapist, like I'm a very conversational coach. It's a lot of coaching. I ask a lot more questions. There's a lot of questions in coaching. But when the session is done with a therapy client, the session's done. I'll see you next week. Coaching client is, all right, when do you want me to text you this week? What are we working on this week? All right, I'll call you on this day or I'll text you on this day. There's a lot more accountability. And I get on them if they haven't gotten it in the most loving and nice but firm way.
Yeah.
And that's what they're paying me for.
Yeah.
Okay, so we went way off on a tangent about the difference
But
between
but
therapy
it's
and coaching.
clear. I think you just said it.
Yeah.
It makes
Yeah.
sense.
So because trauma bonding work for people that need to understand that they're in a trauma bond, they wanna get out of it, they've gotta do the deep dive, they've gotta unpack, they've gotta, like, take that backpack off their back and open up the backpack and look inside. That's that's therapy. The person who comes to me, "I've done that work, I was in these weird relationships, I still kinda see these people, or I still see these people. I don't wanna do that anymore." All right, great. This is coaching. You acknowledge that you were in a trauma bond. You're seeking coaching about how to move forward. Next one, we're gonna establish boundaries. We're gonna really work, and this is both. So this is both here, but my coaching clients, I'm helping you get those boundaries. We're getting those boundaries in place. I'm helping you establish clear and firm boundaries, and we're breaking that down. What does that look like for you? And I'm going to push you to get a little uncomfortable with it. So when they text you and they want you to come over and you're like, "Oh, I don't want to go over." You're not going to go over. And you're going to need some hand holding around that cuz it's going to be really hard to move away from this bond that you historically it's just icky. Okay. So, or Thanksgiving, this is what always happens. All right. So, you want to do it different now. You want your future to look different. So, I'm coaching you up on how you're going to do Thanksgiving Day or Thanksgiving weekend.
Makes
Does that make
sense.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Boundaries are so crucial for your emotional safety. You've got to detach from those unhealthy dynamics that you got yourself into in that relationship. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. Together we're coming up with what that looks like. I'm going to show it to you, and we're going to set up a game plan for getting that done. Okay. And the next one is moving out of these trauma bonds is you've got to have a support system around you. You got to tell people what you're doing. Okay. So you've got a life coach on board. You've got your spouse maybe on board. You've got your sister, your neighbor. You got a couple friends on board. You got people in your life on board. Let them know what you're doing. Talk to them about this. Okay. That's really important. Or go to, maybe you're in a support group that you were in when you were getting out of the trauma bond or when you were in the trauma. And maybe you're still in that support group. Maybe you still go to it from time to time, or maybe you still go every week.
Hmm.
Tell them what you're doing,
Yeah.
and that support group will really help you. They'll really get behind you.
That'd be a massive one,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think.
support groups are amazing.
Yeah.
Don't even get me I love support groups are the best thing. I think we don't talk about them enough. People don't go to them enough because people have hangups about them, but support groups are they're amazing sense of support and community. I'm telling you, they're great things. And so you could continue to go to your trauma support group even though you're no longer you're getting out of the trauma situation, and you can still go. You're not getting kicked out. And you can share with them where you are today, what you're
Right.
doing with your coach, and they're
Someone
like,
else could benefit
"Good
from
on
your
you."
situation,
Yeah, good
right?
on you. Right.
Yeah.
But tell people in your life. So they'll be like, "Remember when you said, you weren't gonna spend all Sundays, doing blah 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 with this or that. Remember, come on, like come with the group. Let's go back. Come on. We all want you to come with us tonight. That's what you need." Okay. And Lastly, you got to focus on your self care. So, all this is really about when you're breaking out of an enmeshed, unhealthy, toxic, trauma bonded relationship and you want new, better, and different things for your life, when you've decided, I'm going to step up, I'm stepping out in my life, and I want to be around new people who excite me, who want the best for me, who, bring out the creative side in me or are making me think differently about things. Like you want a higher vibration. That's what I love. Like I think about that all the time. Like you want higher vibrational people, you want higher positive energy people. You got to take care of yourself. If you want that, you must prioritize your self-care. That's really important. So, engage in those activities for your physical health, your mental health, and your emotional health. Okay. So maybe, this is the time for you to start running. Maybe this is the time for you to join a gym and start going to like a fit bar class or high intensity interval training or a strength training class. Maybe this is the time for you to, maybe you're in therapy and you want coaching because I got people who are doing both. And I that was me for years. I mean, I was in therapy and being coached at the exact same time because they're two different things and both served a different role for me. So it took care of my mental health and it took care of my emotional health, okay?
Yeah. I mean, it takes you so it gets you mentally out of what you're stewing on potentially, right? And it's also filling time gaps of when you might be, like, allowing yourself to think about this or that or talk to somebody in a negative way. Instead, you're like, "No, no, no, I'm gonna go do my whatever, fill in the blank."
Well, because at the time, it wasn't like I said earlier, it's not binary, like, it's not one or the other, this or that. I mean, I was going through there was a time when I needed to still process. So that's therapy, it's process work, and my therapist allows me to talk about whatever I want for as long as I want. I mean, of course, I mean, I think any good therapist would bring out, "All right, you've been talking about this for 6 months and you're not moving," or however,
It's time to move forward.
but for the most
Yeah.
part, my clients don't even do that, but, you know, they can come to the session and it's process work. So they're process I mean, I rarely see that because even if it is 6 months, if they've got PTSD, I mean, that can
It
take
might take longer,
years.
I was gonna say, a
That can
lot
take
longer than
years.
6 months,
Yeah, that
yeah,
can take years. There's no time frame on this.
yeah.
It's grief and loss. There's no time frame on your grieving, and you're processing your feelings around grief or trauma. That's what therapy is for. And I needed to do that and I loved it. I knew that I would go in, sit at this is pre-COVID, sit in my therapist's office and it was like, "What's up? What do you wanna talk about today?" And I could talk about whatever I wanted, and I was processing trauma. At the same time, I was being coached on what do I want my life to look like 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, and that was exciting. I got jazzed about that. It was exciting, it was exhilarating, so I was
Mm,
doing both at the same time, and that was ideal.
yeah.
Cost a lot of money, but it was very much worth it. Yeah, I think that there's something to be said for you gotta put your money, if you can't afford it,
Invest in yourself.
invest in yourself, and if you cannot afford it, there are outlets for you, especially in the mental health space. You can find good therapists who are on your insurance, and if you don't have insurance, you could even find good therapists and really good interns at these community mental health centers that are in every community in the United States and Canada. I mean, you can find really good people where on a sliding fee scale, I mean, I've had clients, I've had family members of clients I've sent to some really great community mental health centers around here that I think do fabulous work. And, their family members pay $10 a session.
Mm,
So you can always find psychotherapy for yourself if you need it. You're in a traumatic relationship that you want to move out of. Coaching is different. You've got people who are all different levels of expertise. So you're going to find, coaching that's, you're going to find $50 a session. You're going to find coaching that's, I mean, it's in the tens of thousands for the high level people. But do your work. It is an investment. I recommend everybody get therapy and coaching at some point in their life. It's so worth it.
yeah, makes
So
sense.
I hope that was helpful to all of you. So we talked about what are trauma bonds, and then how to move out of them. In more in the context of maybe a sibling or a friendship relationship.
Awesome.
So did you learn something today?
Every day. Love it. Of course. It's Anna's, what do I always call this? Masterclass.
Well, this is
It truly is. I'm not joking. I mean, it is a
it's a
masterclass.
master
It's a
class.
total masterclass. Yeah.
And this is more today, Tim. This is it's more trauma, it's mental health. So, this is not something that there are times when I talk about more serious topics and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, or I don't know what to say about this. But, luckily, thankfully, you're one of the few people that are on this planet that you don't have trauma, which is wonderful. You
Well,
don't have
yeah, let's
well, you don't have okay, I won't speak for you.
no, I
I
mean,
won't say
trauma like you
like I'm talking about.
have been
Yeah.
defining it.
Yeah.
Yes, you're correct.
But I love that you are like, "What are you talking about today? I don't understand this," It's good. It's a
Well,
good
it is
thing.
good, and then we'll give a shout out. So we had some of our family together this last weekend,
Yeah.
right? And they all know they're listening. They all know who they are. So, but this podcast came up, right? We did talk about this podcast just in general, like
Yeah.
the fact that we're together and we're on YouTube and all this other stuff. And it was interesting of the feedback was kind of cool because like they were like, you know what? Like you guys, like the dynamic between the two of you is fun to watch
Yeah.
and fun to listen to,
Yeah.
and they're like, and like the questions, Tim, that you ask, like those are the questions that like probably like a normal person would ask.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? I never thought of it that way, but that's true. It's like I try to think like if I was
What
listening
would a
to this,
layperson who's
yeah,
not in my
yeah,
field of therapy or coaching, how would they be thinking about
right.
this, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so I'll get you to tap the brakes for just a second sometimes because I'm like, okay, if I have this question, I know somebody else has got this question
Yeah.
out there 100%.
Yeah.
So it's good. It's
Yeah, we've been getting really good feedback, so thank you everyone, for the feedback that you're giving us, and, thank you for the reviews, and keep them
totally.
coming. I do read them. It means a lot, and we're on YouTube, and we've gotten good feedback about YouTube. People said, "Yeah, watching the 2 of you and your dynamic is cool." So, and I was surprised. I mean, we had people over a few weeks ago and family friends, which I had no idea that they listened to the podcast, and they're like, "The podcast is really good." So, we're hearing some really good things lately, and we're just gonna continue to grow this baby.
See what happens.
Yeah, we won't see what happens. We're gonna make it happen.
Make it
So
happen.
it's gonna happen. Yeah. All right, everyone. So please, as always, rate and review the podcast 5 stars and give us a shout out. And you can always email me if there's something you want us to talk about that, just you're not getting the answers to. Please reach out. Hello at annamarcolene.com. I'd be happy to talk about it on the podcast. And as always, take care of yourself. Mad love, everyone.
Right?